I would like to start acknowledging that this work has been done in the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people, whom I respect for their resilience and endeavor in caring for country over thousands of years. I will also like to express my appreciation to the Andean people who have continued practicing textile traditions over generations and are a legacy and source of inspiration for this work. I will also like to honor the work indigenous peoples are doing around the world, looking after traditional knowledge about land, healing, and community, and also recognize their continuing connection to the land, waterways, and sky above. The lenses that frame this work are my life experiences, including the teachings from a birthland next to the Andes Mountains in the Valley of Santiago, the port of Valparaiso, as well as my experience of migration to Naarm, Melbourne, which currently makes me understand myself as a Chilena mestiza, which is a person of mixed heritage between indigenous Spaniards and other unknowns. I am currently practicing design as landscape architect and urban designer, while doing doctoral studies on cultural landscapes and participatory design. My journey with the Khipu started with the question, what elements from my birthland can assist in research methods for design? I was introduced to the Khipu during a master's design studio by my friend Sarita, a Chilean artist and researcher in education. I started exploring the Khipu throughout the course of this design studio, and later I continued doing it in my master thesis. In this presentation, I will share some current understandings of the temporality of Khipu, from the past, present, and also I will show two ways of exploring the Khipu as a creative practice methodology for design research. These attempts respond to the critical need of unfolding alternative methods and practices to build respectful cross-cultural relationships with the design practice and curriculum. So firstly, let's start with the current understanding of what a Khipu is. Khipu, which means knot in Quechua, or quipu, its equivalent in Spanish, is a textile communication technology based on knots and threads made from natural fibers and used as a record-keeping device by Andean cultures in the south of the American continent. The quipu expresses different physical qualities depending on the values encoded within, showing different types of fiber, widths of thread, colors, amount and types of knots, direction and tightness of the twist. The quipu is used as an archive to collect ancient memories, while at the same time a language based on corporeal thinking, where knots do not relate to words, but to things. The origins of quipu date back thousands of years. Archaeological records had found evidence of quipu in Andean cultures dated around 3,000 years before Christ. The technique was carried through to the Inca culture until the arrival of the Spaniards. Its use was extended along the lands of the Andes Mountain that is known today as Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. Quipus were made and read by quipu camayocs, the quipu readers. These quipu makers not only knew how to codify information from oral tradition, but also knew how to see the world through the act of making quipus. This is based on the relational epistemology from Andean culture, which considers a continuous relationship between all the existing things. In that sense, quipu practice mirrors social and cultural processes and were under constant transformation. Khipu studies have identified some possible uses in pre-colonial times. One of its possible uses was for the administrative accounting, a numerical decimal-based instrument to record numerical data, such as collection of tribute, censuses, inventories, and other quantitative information. The second use is for narrative keeping and storytelling functions as a support of oral traditions and memory, archiving poetry, songs, and stories. The last one is related to the oracle and divinatory practices, also known as Khipumancy. This practice is similar to cartomancy but using the knots to reach information beyond the knots themselves. Khipumancy is considered a pathway of knowledge to foretell the future, revealing information about weather, lost objects, causes of illness, or foreseeing outcomes. Since the arrival of Spaniards in the 1553 and the establishment of the Viceroyalty of Peru, Khipu practice was vastly silenced. Khipu making was considered a profane activity by the new law, and therefore it was banned. During colonial times, many quipus were destroyed and buried, while in some instances the practice survived at the edges of the colony. For example, in the Tupicocha community in the highlands of the Huarochirí region and the Yumani group and the island of the Sun in the Titicaca Lake. Here, quipus coexisted with the Spanish writing until early 20th century. So let's move on to the present. Through desktop research, I have found different contemporary approaches to Khipu, and I have classified them into 4 types. One of these is the historic approach, which from an anthropological point of view seeks to understand the past of Andean culture by analyzing the quipus. This approach includes attempts to decipher the code that was used to make them. Researchers from the social sciences have been investigating the archaeological quipus found so far, which add up over 600 items. The analyses done include examination of their physical characteristics, deciphering transcriptions called the paper quipus, which were quipus read out loud and transcribed by a scribe during colonial times. Ethnographic studies based on conversation with Andean people who carried knowledge about the ancient quipus, and also the use of digital technologies to perform large-scale analysis of digital data gathered from archaeological quipus. So far, after all that examination, the quipu has resisted to be fully interpreted, and what the knots mean remain unknown. The secondary contemporary approach is the educational approach. This one seeks to promote a sense of identity linked to the Andean culture. Quipus has been introduced to schools and museum contexts by offering workshops to kids where they can learn what a quipu is and have the opportunity to make their own quipu based on the aesthetics of archaeological examples. A third contemporary approach is the symbolic. From some communities, such as the Tupicocha, quipus are the most important symbolic legacy from their ancestors. Archaeological quipus are a form of symbol of power, and they are carried by community authorities and official ceremonies. The final contemporary approach is artistic. This seeks to re-signify and revalue the pre-colonial origins of quipu from a contemporary art perspective, while honoring its ancient deepness. Latin American artists have been engaging with quipu to open new ways of communicating and responding to their mestizo identity. So, who has currently been exploring the quipu? So, Paola Torres unifies quipus artist voices in her Neo Quipu Camayoc manifesto. This manifesto stresses ethical principles of respect and responsibility that should lead the way for a neo-Latin American identity to embrace its Andean cultural heritage. This approach seeks to uplift silenced memories that are still in the land, bodies, and tools people use. In a similar way, Cecilia Vicuña's art uses the structural function of the ancient quipu to allow new epistemological codes that are dialogues with ancient Latin American identities, their land and history, by using Andean elements in her art practice. In this artistic perspective, quipus are textile narratives sitting in a non-temporal dimension, where past and future coexist. In that way, her artistic statement is to claim what the time has erased. This contemporary artistic approach is not about replicating archaeological quipus, but about connecting the maker, the present, and the context through an active contemplation that links the maker to the indigenous memories of the continent. This connection happens through a tactile sensorial body experience, which allows an intimate connection by knotting, touching, rubbing, carrying, and stretching. Contemporary quipu making can be understood as an art practice that resists modernity, while at the same time acknowledging ancient ways of doing, thinking, and seeing. In this way, quipu can open pathways with a participatory ethic. And what does this relate to my practice? Well, I have been exploring quipu as a methodology underpinned by the artistic approach. This creative methodology allows listening, ensembling, and embodying stories and histories by noting, while repositioning relational epistemologies. I have explored quipu in two scenarios. The first one is about gathering data from interactions with participants by knotting stories into color threads as part of a common quipu. I use this method to delve into questions about open space features with individual members from culturally diverse groups in Melbourne and a Maori group in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This medium allowed building trust in a context where English was not necessarily the first language, validating a sense of being heard, as people could see their stories taking shape, while also making a space to reflect on their everyday practices. Each of the experiences informed the next one, which the last one was a foundational element for a landscape concept designed for the Maori group. The second scenario is noting to analyze complex data, which I did for my master thesis. This included processing historical, archaeological, cultural, social, and environmental components by knotting and unknotting to inform a landscape concept design. In both instances, the quipu body took shape depending on the contents considered. This allowed me to analyze the elements of the story from the quipu body, where the textile and three-dimensional features revealed the interrelatedness of key elements, which otherwise would have been hidden. In doing so, my perspective was transformed and was able to see key connections that informed my design practice. So, to conclude, we need to think about the quipu more than a universal response to assist design research methodologies, but instead, we need to start paying attention to these artistic languages that we, as designers, feel drawn to explore and may become a tool for design. These alternative languages can become pathways to respectfully access relational thinking, while at the same time honoring ancient roots of the language and recognizing the vital legacy of traditional knowledges for design pedagogies, practice, and research. I plan to continue unfolding my journey with quipu during my PhD, reflecting on where it takes me, and at the same time encouraging peers to find their own artistic mediums for their creative practices.